Welcome, everyone. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Adele Weinstein, and I am the president of Beth Tikvah Women. And I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's program. And I'd like to thank everyone who has helped out to make this program. I want to thank Gail Kurtzman, who is the Director of Programs, Events, and Community Relations, Rivka Campbell, our Executive Director, Daniel, who is the Marketing and Communications, and I want to especially thank Phyllis Taylor, who has joined us this evening. And before we get going with the program, and before I tell you a little bit about Phyllis, I just wanted to mention that some of the upcoming programs that Beth Tikvah Women will be having. In April, we're going to have another book review. In May, we're having our annual Mother's Day plant sale. And in August, we're going to be going on a theater outing to St. Jacob's Playhouse, where we're going to be seeing Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. So for 20 years, Phyllis was teaching technology at an international law firm determined to make lawyers shine. All grown up and driven to enhance her own education, Phyllis attended Ryerson University to study journalism, George Brown College to study adult education and counseling, and University of Toronto to study philosophy, thus deepening her reflections on life. A decade ago, Phyllis overcame her teaching addiction to embrace her speaking addiction, where competitive public speaking performances won her numerous awards. Recently, Phyllis authored The Prison Lady, a memoir of her journey alongside prisoners. When Phyllis isn't speaking, writing, or attending courses, she can be found counseling others in her capacity as a certified life and mediation coach. Phyllis says her ultimate professional pride is her position with the Ministry of Ontario, where she delivers motivational pieces and has won awards for her dedication, innovation, and inspirational work with prisoners. Loving and respecting marginalized people while guiding them on their healing journey is what Phyllis calls making her dream a reality. Please join me in welcoming Phyllis Taylor to Beth Tikvah Synagogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that generous, wonderful introduction, Adele, and thank you for welcoming me into your synagogue. And thank you, everyone, for welcoming me into your homes. It's a bit of a tongue twister. I am going to just take a moment now to share my screen. So just give me a second to do the setup here. And we will be on our way. Oops. We want to go back. Sorry, guys, I'll be right. I just want to make sure we're starting at the beginning. There we go. So here is my book, The Prison Lady, and this is what I'm going to be talking about this evening. I'm going to be talking about not just my work in the prison, but my life that led up to the prison, because I want to explain how did a nice Jewish girl like me end up in prison? And The Prison Lady, when I tell people the name of my book, sometimes people look at me like, oh my God, should we be afraid of you? Well, not so much. And I'm usually careful to explain that I wasn't a prisoner, but I was working alongside them. Life for me began in an Orthodox Reform home, which I'm going to explain, Orthodox Reform Jewish home. I believe in all my heart and with all my heart that my journey is beshert. Most of you know that that means divine intervention. And when you see the path that my life took that put me on the stage with prisoners and on many stages, that it all began with some negativity and some difficulties. Nevertheless, I do believe it was beshert, and that is how I became the prison lady. So here's my mom. I think I have a beautiful mom. This is both my parents have now passed away, so not to mislead you. But there was my mother at 32 years old, who was a beautiful woman. In fact, her nickname was Corsage Receiving. And that's because she was very popular and she was dating. Except she waited and she dated till she was well into her 30s. And back then, that was what we unflatteringly would refer to as an old maid. So my mother decided that, you know what, I think that I better find myself a hubby, because my mother wanted to have children and settle down. And there's my dad. There's my dad with my mom. So here is where the problem began, right here, when they met. My father was an Orthodox Jewish man, and he was going to remain an Orthodox Jewish man. My mother, on the other hand, was a Reformed Jewish woman. So while my father was home davening, my mother was sneaking my brother and I out the back door for bacon and eggs. Extra bacon, extra crispy. So you can imagine what went on in my home. It was not very pleasant, it was not very easy, and it was not very healthy. My father was abusive, severely abusive, and I'm what's known as, or I suppose more accurately, I was what would be known as the scapegoat child. What I mean by that is my brother was never abused, was never hurt physically, etc., but I was. My brother explains it as, well, you know what, I could run faster than you, but I'm not so sure that was the reason. I'm going to, as I go through my presentation, I'm going to read some passages from my book. And this is the first one. The last time my dad beat me, it left visible physical scars. I recall looking up at him and thinking, "You're not just mad at me, Daddy. You're angry with yourself." My dad was not only hurting me as a result of his anger, he was hurting me to release it. We call this the scapegoat child. As a kid, I was terrified, so I challenged myself to live a life that was over the top and under the radar. I learned that friends were supportive and parents were dangerous. I discovered that life began outside the home, where I could brush up against the normalcy of others. I indulged in exaggerated makeup, big hair, nothing's changed, and age inappropriate clothing. I use provocative language and love the company of boys, Jewish or not. Sorry, I'm going to go back to that. On Saturday afternoons, I would sneak out for a matinee movie, only to crouch in the back row of a dark theater with big hair Claude. I'm missing some of my screen, so just bear with me here for a second so that you could probably see it better than I can. On Saturday afternoons, I would sneak out for a matinee movie, only to crouch in the back row of a dark theater with big hair Claude. Barely 13, I still remember how exhilarating it was to feel his arms around me in what I considered a loving hug. All of this was a silent cry for help. So, because my dad was an extreme introvert, which is really an odd thing for an insurance salesman or any salesman. But because he was an introvert, he decided that his daughter was going to be an extrovert. And guess what? It worked. Anyone who knows me can tell you I am a 5-alarm extrovert. And what my father decided was that it was going to begin in the form of public speaking. And so as soon as I could reach the kitchen table, I was put in every public speaking contest that my dad could find, either in school or it would be outside in the community. And so he would give me the Reader's Digest and he would tell me to memorize a chapter of the Reader's Digest, twist it up just a little bit, and regurgitate it in a public speaking contest. And it worked because my father remained an introvert because it never affected him that I was in public speaking contests. But guess what happened to me? I just kept talking and talking and competing and winning. And you know what? I actually kind of liked it. Sorry. And so I called that chapter Public Speaking 101. Hang on, I'm just going to take a bit of a drink. that was my first stage, but there was also a second stage. I'm so sorry. I began seeing, this is my boyfriend Paul. I'm sorry, I may have to excuse myself to take a decent drink. Hang on a second.
No worry, take your time.
Sorry. You know, in all my years of speaking, I don't think that's happened. And here I am talking about my public speaking. I don't think I ever swallowed wrong.
That's
So
okay.
this is my second stage. And this is my boyfriend, Paul, very young. I was very young. And this is a picture of him at the time, too. He was also very young. And this is him as a DJ. He was a DJ. And guess what? He's still a DJ and he's approaching 70. Nevertheless, my boyfriend Paul decided that I was going to be his go-go dancer. And while he was playing and spinning the records, I was all dressed up in a go-go outfit with go-go boots, fringed costume, and dancing on stage. So here I am at my second stage. But you know what happened? Being a little enterprising, still in my very early teens, I decided, why am I go-go dancing for my boyfriend when I could go out and earn some money for makeup and stuff? Third stage. So luckily, fortunately, I had parents who went to bed very early. And here I am, I'm 15 years old. I'm still in high school. I'm expected to be at my desk every day and learning and paying attention. But after my parents went to bed at about, I don't know, it was about 9 o'clock latest, I would sneak out my bedroom window and pay attention, people. I was hitchhiking down to Yorkville in the 60s. Talk about taking a risk. Talk about being a risk taker. I got myself a job in Boris's discotheque in Yorkville, in the village, and hitchhiking down there. But oh my God, life was exciting. So that was me as a go-go dancer in Yorkville in the 60s. There was another stage, and this one was as a grown-up. I was working for a very prestigious law firm. And so in my professional life, so now I'm a grown up, I'm like all grown up and still wanting the stage. And my fourth stage, I called this chapter the gift of adversity, because I was working for a major downtown international law firm. We call these firms the Seven Sisters because there are seven of these. There may be a few more by now, but there are about 7, maybe 10 of these major downtown international Toronto firms. And I was teaching technology at one of them. So I was employed with the firm for 30 years. 10 of those years I was a paralegal, and 20 of those years I was on stage. That's my fourth stage because I was teaching lawyers. Well, I was teaching lawyers, that is, until they hired a new director. For 20 years I was reporting to a gal, and we had a fantastic relationship. But for whatever reason, they fired her and brought in a new director who felt a little intimidated by me, shall we say. I guess because she came from a bank and wasn't sure about the difference between a lawyer and a law clerk, and she was asking me questions. And so I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I should let human resources know. After all, that was my job, was to teach people and to let human resources know my findings. So I went to human resources and I told them that they had made a very bad hire. And it turns out that the person that I reported this bad hire to was a very gal who had hired my director. She was the international director of training and overseeing all the different cities. And I was teaching in these cities, but it didn't go over so well. And I was already getting closer to retirement. And so human resources said, my human resources director, who was also a friend of mine, said to me, what I'm about to do, Phyllis, is very bad for the firm, but it'll be very good for you. You know that moment when shock morphed into awareness was like something out of a made-for-TV movie. This horrific marker represented 30 years with the firm, 20 years of building a training department, and an enormous amount of pride. All of it was packed into a single cardboard box, and I was escorted out of the building after 30 years. I was escorted out of the building in a painful and humiliating walk of shame. It was crushing. Shocked by this epic fail, I was devastated. So, with tears streaming down my cheeks and a numbness I had only heard about, and deep emotional pain, I found my way over to a neighboring law firm. That was a firm where Mel worked. Melanie is my daughter. My daughter actually studied under me and is and was paralegal. My daughter took a look at, you know, that envelope they give you when they want to have you gone from any particular firm? That's your parting agreement, termination agreement, they call it. So my daughter takes a look at my envelope. She's reading it, and she's a paralegal now. And she just leaps out of her seat. She goes, "Oh my God, Mom, you won the lottery." Because I was paid for 2 years. And that's part of my story, because that 2-year pay enabled me to be a volunteer. So I kind of went home that evening and cried myself to sleep. I really couldn't believe this happened to me. I mean, being fired, that's humiliating and it's painful. So the next morning I woke up, made the bed, and I thought, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And then my friend Linda called, and she was very excited. And Linda said, "Oh my God, Oprah's coming to town and we're going." And I said, "No way. What do I know from Oprah?" I mean, I'm a working girl. I wasn't watching Oprah. Of course, I knew who Oprah was, but I wasn't all that mesmerized at that time with Oprah. I have to say I am nowadays. I'm still listening to her podcast and still learning. But in those days, it was like, I'm not going to see Oprah. And I said to Linda, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to see Oprah. I just got fired. I have no money." She said, "Yes, you do. Because you called me last night and told me you got 2 years pay." So I lost that fight. And Linda and I went down to the Air Canada Centre to see Oprah. But it wasn't just Oprah. And here's the story. Oprah had actually, I am a graphic designer, so I made Oprah look really good in this picture. I squished it in just a little bit for this slide. And I hope she thanks me one day. And I really still want to get to meet her because she changed my life. It wasn't just Oprah that was on the stage that day. It was Tony Robbins. It was Deepak Chopra. And it was this fellow here, Bishop T.D. Jakes. And it was Bishop T.D. Jakes who changed my life. Because in addition to the motivational speakers that were on the stage that day at the Oprah Life class, guess what else was on the stage? See how we have cubby holes here on this Zoom conference? They had Skyped in behind Oprah at the back of the stage, six women from the penitentiary in Indiana. So here I am, kicking and screaming, not wanting to go there. It was a miserable, rainy day. We had to line up outside. The seats were not reserved. It took hours and hours to get in. And I'm all surrounded by these Oprah-inspired folks, elbow to elbow. And then they call us all in. And I am watching not Oprah, not the speakers, but the women from the penitentiary in Indiana who were Skyped in. I was mesmerized by these women. 6 women from penitentiary in Indiana, who I call the six pack, were sharing their stories. When Bishop said, "Could it be that we allow the conditions in our lives to distract us from the meaning of our lives?" And the bishop ended with, "Others can inspire you, but ultimately, the only thing that empowers you is what lies within you and learning how to better utilize what you've been given. I monitored the six-pack intently for their reactions. Several of the women lit up with what seemed to be some sort of emergent light. I understood that along with six inspired women, my restorative soul had taken root. It was clear that this moment was pivotal and that it would permanently alter my psyche. A desperate but somehow hopeful group of women from a penitentiary in Indiana had reinforced my heart and redirected my future forever. That was over a decade ago. Suddenly, involuntarily, I slapped my knee and sprung from my seat. It was a eureka moment. I was screaming and out of control. Holy! That's what I'll do with the rest of my life. Hooray for Linda. Hooray for Oprah. Hooray for Bishop T.D. Jakes. And the six-pack. Phyllis is coming to town. So Linda, of course, could not understand my enthusiasm or what was going through my mind or what exactly I thought I was going to do with the rest of my life or why I was so happy and so excited. I mean, I had just lost my job about a month before. But I couldn't wait to get home, to go to sleep like really fast, to wake up the next morning, because I was already formulating a plan. I'm going to call every single prison that I could drive to in, let's say, a 20 to 30 kilometer radius, and I'm going to hand myself over and they're going to want me. But I wasn't sure what they would want me for. I just knew I need to do this. Now, understand and recall, I've been public speaking all my life. And so aside from being a technical teacher, I'm a motivational speaker, wouldn't you think? I mean, it just goes with the territory. Not so much. I had to do a little work to get there. But I got up the next morning and I started calling all prisons. Does anybody need a motivational speaker? I left on the voicemail message. My final stage. Remember, I was up to 4 stages. This is 5. Finally, about 2 weeks after leaving a voicemail for every prison that I could drive to within a 20 kilometer to 30 kilometer radius, I got a call back from one Lori Shank. She was the educational director and director of volunteer services at Metro East Detention Center, located at, I think it was Warden and Eglinton, more or less, in Scarborough. And Lori called up. She says, you left a message on my voicemail a couple of weeks ago. What can I do for you? And I said, well, I'm a motivational speaker. Can you use me in any way, shape, or form in your prison? She said, well, no, I don't think so. So I said, well, what do you offer the prisoners in terms of rehabilitation there? She says, well, we have yoga and AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, well, oh my God, my motivational speaking will go fantastic with yoga. I mean, had she said it was basket weaving, I would have said the same thing. So I think in order to get me off the phone, she made an appointment to see me. And she said, well, why don't you come in on Monday at 1:00? Bring your resume. And I thought, okay, this is really cool. Being a Facebook gal, I posted up on Facebook, oh my God, life is good. Not only did I lose my job, but I've got an interview with a prison. Now, this is Beshert. I get a call back. I get a call from my former director. Remember I told you I had a director that I reported to for 20 years as a training specialist? And her and I had a wonderful relationship, the one that got fired? Yeah, that was kind of cool. Well, she saw my post and she called me that evening and she said, by any chance, the person who you've got an interview with, is that Metro East? And I said, yeah, why? She said, well, she's now working for Durham College and she had a course for security guards, for prison guards. And she was still quite friendly with one of the guys. And she said, well, do you want me to put in a good word for you? I'm like, Yeah, that would be great. So by the time I arrived at my appointment to see Lori Shank at 1 o'clock on Monday, she greets me at the control desk, all explained in the book how the control desk works and how nobody smiles at you, and you're checked upside down like you're going undercover for the FBI. Lori Shank met me at the control desk and she says, "Come on in. I know exactly what we're going to do with your course." And I'm like, "Oh my God, course? What course?" And she said, what do you want to speak about?" And I said, "Honestly, I have no idea. I just know I want to do this." She says, "Well, do you think you could write a little bit about anger management?" I said, "Consider it done." She says, "You're going to start in 1 month and we'll give you training." What are you going to train me on? Hang on, I'm clicking all over the place here. Here we go. So I'm brought in for training within a couple of weeks. I'm brought in for training, and they're training me on hostage taking. And I'm thinking, what have I what have I signed up for? I am going to be taken hostage. But here's the thing, guys. Here's what I want to tell you and what I want to share. I believe with all my heart that passion creates the kind of courage that actually overcomes fear. I liken it to a mom who obviously loves their child and their child's running out into traffic. What do? Are you afraid of traffic at that point? No, you're going to run out into the traffic. You're going to save the kid, aren't you? Well, that's the kind of passion I have in prison and for prisoners. By the end of that training, I knew that my life had forever changed. So you see how I've got "Don't look, it's not a zoo." During the training, it's just a little cute bit of the story. During the training, they took us down into the cell block. It's called a cell block. And on one side of the wall, it's covered with prisoners. And on the other side of the wall, it's just brick wall. And we were warned, there was a couple of us in training that evening, and we were warned to stand against the wall and don't go anywhere near the cell block because you never know who's going to grab you or reach out or hurt you. So we're all inching our way along the cell block, at which point our training professional said, "Don't look. When you get inside the cell block, don't look. It's not a zoo." So as soon as we got inside the cell block, we all turned our head. It's like a magnet. You can't not look. And it was very interesting that it actually did look a bit like a zoo because the men were all looking out at us. I mean, it was like, oh my God, people are coming, and like real people. And they're all shapes, they're all sizes, they're all colors. It's everyone. Correctional services. I'm just switching things around so I can read this. Correctional Services of Canada operates 5 women's institutions. 5 women's institutions in all of Canada. Interesting, isn't it? What I'm showing you here is I'm going to talk about my first experience in the women's prison, but what I am showing you beforehand is a typical women's cell in this prison. The prison that I was visiting, because I'm in a total of 5 prisons in Ontario, and the prison here is Vanier Correctional Institute for Women, which is situated in Milton. And you can see there's just a little bit of spot on the left to hang up a little bit of clothing or whatever else you might have. I'm not even sure what is on the, oh, you know what that is? There's 2 bunks. Sometimes I'm just realizing this actually. I was looking at that all day thinking, what is that? It's actually 2 bunks. They've got the upper, you see it's labeled number 1, and I'm sorry, upper is labeled 2, the lower is labeled number 1, and it's kind of a skinny bed, isn't it? And not all that comfortable. So there's 2 bunks, and sometimes they will use them both depending on the population, and sometimes the prisoner may be lucky enough to have a private room. And then there's a little bit of a table, 2 chairs, 2 benches. But notice on the bottom left, this is their sink and this is their toilet. there's not a lot of privacy. And this is a women's prison. So I received a call from Penny McLean of the women's prison in Milton. It's called Vanier Correctional Institute. And she asked me if I'd like to come in and interview. And I did. I went in and interviewed, and she said to me, "You know what? Well, we could try you out, and if you want to put together something on positive thinking, we can try you out, and if we like you, we'll see if we can get you back again." I thought, all right, Penny, I'll just give you my best. So I prepared a really nice presentation, slides just like I'm showing you today, on positive thinking. There's a little bit of a glitch. When I got to the parking lot, I was so excited or nervous or something. I don't usually get nervous, but I was quite excited that I actually locked all of my materials into my car. And I had a Phyllis style meltdown. It's not pretty. I don't think anybody's meltdown is pretty, but this was definitely not my finest moment. But what happened was that I said to myself, "Oh, you know what? Come on, girl. You are about to teach positive thinking to a bunch of women. You better just cool it, take a deep breath." At which point I calmed myself down just long enough to realize that although I had left my equipment and everything in the car, I had my car keys, and I just literally walked backwards to my car, retrieved my stuff, went out, and actually gave the best damn performance of my entire life. And when I was finished, I told the women what had happened to me in the parking lot. I thought I'd locked everything into my car, and I had a really ugly meltdown. But I used this positive thinking lesson that I have shared with you women today, speaking to them, to calm myself down, back up to the car, and continue on. One woman stood and she said, "Why was I never told this stuff growing up?" And I said, "Well, you're being told now, and I'm really happy to be here with you and for you and to teach you." At that point, I said, "Thank you." We concluded, and 100 women stood and applauded. I had cheerleaders. And Penny McLean of Vanier told me I had a post, and I was in every single Tuesday afternoon. I would go to Milton, and Tuesday afternoon I was teaching the women of general population. That's a general population in the prison. And then I'd go out and I'd get myself an ice cream cone. That was called dinner, still is kind of. And I'd come back in the evening because I had a second shift on Tuesday. I mean, when you're out there, you may as well make the most of your time. And I was assigned to work with the women in protective custody. And these are women who are murderers. Some of them are criminally and mentally insane. I have worked with a teacher who was charged with statutory rape, student under the age of majority. I mean, it was just an experience that I cannot really fully put into words, but you can imagine that it was one of my finest opportunities because I was able to work with the most needy amongst us. And although it would take me a week or two to do a lesson in general population, and it might take 5 or 6 to do the same lesson in protective custody, I was moving the needle forward just ever so slightly with those women. Here's a typical area. This is inside Vanier, and this is a picture of inside Vanier. It isn't one I took because when we go into the prison as volunteers, we have to go dark, which means you don't bring your purse, you don't bring your phone, you don't bring equipment, you don't bring anything, and everything you do bring is you're going through a check. So this is inside the women's prison, and this is where I would meet with them. You can see that there is room for them to sit, and it's just like in the movies where they've got the metal tables that are bolted to the floor and the seats are bolted and everything's bolted to the floor because everything is dangerous and everything is a weapon. I'm often asked whether there's ever any Jewish prisoners. And at this point, I thought I'd take a moment and I would share with you that yes, the prison is not populated with Jewish prisoners, but I have come across a couple of women and a couple of men who were really very, very grateful to have met me. And I'll tell you why. I always made it a practice when I was in the prison, and once I knew that I was loved and wanted and accepted and respected, I thought it was important for me, and certainly not every week, but from time to time to share with these people, with the entire audience, that I am a Jewish person. And the reason I like to do that was because I thought, with all the anti-Semitism in the world, with the training that I had from my father, with the knowledge of, we are not always thought of fondly. Knowing that these people loved me and connected with me and saw me as someone who was kind and good with them, it was an opportunity to say, hey, look, this is who we are. So no matter what you've been told, no matter what you think, no matter what your experiences have been, there's us. There's people who are here, who understand you, want to help you, who are kind and who are just like anyone else. So I would always share the fact that I'm Jewish whenever the opportunity arose. I'm also asked from time to time if there's kosher food for Jewish people in prison, and yes, there is. There was up to and including my last time visiting the prison. And there's also rabbi council. So there are, I think that what I've come across is two rabbis in all my time in the prison system, which is a decade, and two rabbis who come sort of regularly to visit, just like there would be chaplains and other religious council. There's also rabbis available. I'm going to get into a couple of stories about my time in the prison, things that really stuck with me that I want to share with you. I was teaching in the women's prison one day when all of a sudden, and of course, all of these stories are outlined in my book in a lot more detail than what we could go into in an evening. But I was doing a small workshop in the women's prison, and all of a sudden, about 5 or 10 minutes into this, Trish, one of my attendees, screams out, this seminar I was doing was called Building a Healthy Relationship. And Trish screams out, love shouldn't hurt. And of course, that's a big signal that she's in a relationship that does hurt. And I said, what's going on, Trish? Do you want to share today? And she said, I'm getting out of prison soon and I'm going home to Carl. And Carl's her husband, and he is extremely abusive, physically abusive. And I said, do you want to talk about it? And she said, yes, I will. And at that point, I stopped everything I was doing. I asked the rest of the class. It was a small workshop. It was about 15 women in there, perhaps even 12. And they all decided that, yeah, we were going to stop everything and all our learning, and we were going to work with Trish, and we were going to try to see her through this. And so I asked Trish what was going on, and she said, I've got an abusive husband. I'm getting out of prison in a couple of weeks, and I'm going home to him. And I said, but if he's abusing you, and also she had shared with me in earlier classes that she ended up in prison because of this abuse, because when you've been abused and you call the police, they can charge the abuser, they can charge the victim, or they can charge both. If they perceive that there's a mutual battle between the couple and they think that she may have instigated or he may have instigated, not sure, they can charge both. In any event, she was charged with abuse and ended up in prison, and he did not. So I don't know all of the details, obviously, just what's shared with me, but she was going home to him. And when I asked her why, she said, because this is my second marriage and my second baby daddy, and I cannot bring shame on my family. And I want you to keep in mind that I was a technical trainer at that point, and although I was taking a lot of classes, psychology and life coaching and all the rest of it, I wasn't a true professional at that point. And I pulled this out, and I don't even know how. I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I had just been teaching building a healthy relationship, and I tore a paper out of my briefcase, and I said, ladies, here's what we're going to do. I want everyone to write down one quality that you think is really critical in a healthy relationship. And I just taught them this. So here's the list that they come back with: honesty, trust, tells the truth. I guess that's honesty. This is the actual list. I've recreated it, but this is the actual handwritten list. Funny, so humorous. Smart, so intelligent. Supports me. We all want that. Love, kind of nice in a healthy relationship. Intelligence, again. Responsibility, being a responsible individual. Loves my kids or likes my kids. That's a good thing. Gentle and kind. So I had passed this list around the room, and everybody had added one item to the list and handed it back to me as it came back through the circle. And I wrote reasonable and fair. And I handed the list over to Trish and I said, here, I want you to go through this list. I want you to take your pencil, and where Carl has the quality that matches the list, check it off. And where he does not, put a strike through. She literally picked up her pencil. This is my lipstick. She literally picked up her pencil and she went like this. It's hard to describe that in a book. And you know what? She just went through every single one of these items, crossing them out with a vengeance. And then she calmly put her pencil down, folded her hands, and looked at me. At which point the sheet was handed back to me, and I was able to say to her, oh, I guess we went backwards. I was able to say, anything can happen on Zoom. I think it's much easier when you're live. And I am alive. So she handed it back to me, at which point I was able to say to her, Trish, work with me here. I mean, you are putting yourself at risk. You're putting your children at risk, and you're dealing with a man who has none of the qualities that you know that we need, that we have just talked about, that we've just learned about, that we all need in a healthy relationship. And I had an ace in the hole because I knew that her kids were staying with her mom. Not everybody's that lucky. Some women go into prison and their kids are taken into children's aid. Sometimes they're adopted out depending on the length of time. There's all different things that can happen, but her mom had her kids. And I said, Trish, your mom wouldn't want to see this happen to you. She said, well, you don't understand. Carl is my brother's best friend. And I said, but does your brother know what he's doing to you? She said, I don't know. And I said, well, I don't think your brother would want you to be hurt. And I don't think your mother would want you to be hurt. What are you going to do? What can we do, Trish? And honestly, there were tears rolling down everyone's face, her face, my face, and everyone in the room. You could hear a pin drop at this point as we sat and cried together. And she said, I'll call my lawyer in the morning. But that's not all. Because my book intersects my life. Remember, it is a memoir. I'm speaking a lot about prison because it seems to interest people. And when we have about an hour, that's what I focus on. But my memoir is also about my own relationships. And after working with Trish that afternoon, I got into my car. I was exhausted. I slumped over the steering wheel and I said to myself, you know what, girlfriend? You're not in a healthy relationship either. I was in a 22-year marriage that was going nowhere and not making me happy. That evening, I went home and asked my husband for a divorce and left him. So I have a circular message in my book, and that is that I was fulfilling a lifelong dream by helping marginalized and disenfranchised people. But they were also helping me, and it was all shared. From my father insisting that I be a speaker, that I do competitive speaking, that I be an extrovert, to the boyfriend who thought I belonged on stage dancing, to Boris's in Yorkville who thought I should be dancing on a stage in a cage with strobe lights. It all led up to this moment. And to the work I did in the prison. And it enabled me to have the courage to leave my marriage. And I did. And you're going to have to read the book to find out what happened after my marriage ended, because I'm very happily engaged right now and have been for many years. Did we happen to skip something? Yes, we did. Okay. So there's a chapter in my book that deals with three women now these three women were in protective custody. So remember, I do Tuesday afternoon in general population and Tuesday evening in protective custody. And there were three women in protective custody that had all been prostitutes in a prior life and had come together in prison. And you know what? Instead of yoga, they had sex. So Brandy, Raven, and Ruby were all involved with one another, physically, romantically, and emotionally. And I have named the chapter, Welcome to, brace yourself, it's not a pretty word. I won't say it out loud. And this is what I heard after those women had become involved, and I had begged them and pleaded with them and spoken to the director of education as to what was going on, and nobody was paying attention to me. But here's what happened. I walk into the prison on Tuesday afternoon, and I hear from one of the guards, "Animal kingdom today, Phyllis," with a little bit of a smirk. Luckily, there were no weapons. But I mean, they had a hair-pulling, kicking, and screaming round of combat on the dining room floor at Brecky. Raven scratched Ruby's face. Ruby destroyed Raven's uniform until they both lay crying in the fetal position until we carted them off. Brandy was cool, eh? Sure, Brandy was cool because the other two had fallen in love with her and were fighting over her. Brandy was cool, eh? But now they're all in lockup, said Charlie, a rather funny English officer with a quirky hint of humanity. Following solitary confinement, all three women would be assigned to separate units, never to ignite again, at least not in prison. So this is a real picture of my girl Destiny. That's not her real name, but that is her picture. And in every prison I was assigned, it's really interesting, in every prison I was assigned an assistant. And Destiny was my assistant in the women's prison. And so when I was leaving the prison, Destiny took it upon herself, because we had become friends, that she needed to sit me down and give me a warning. And so she said, "Come on, Phyllis, let's go somewhere private. I have to speak to you," because she was leaving. She had been my assistant. She had been my friend. And she thought, you know what? I need to teach Phyllis something because I'm leaving and I don't know if she's going to be okay on her own here. So she said, "Let's go somewhere quiet." And she dragged me into the laundry room. So that was quiet for her because there's people coming and going, and the most privacy they have is the laundry room, I suppose. I'm not really allowed in the cell unit, but I was snuck in there once. Whoops. So here we are sitting in the laundry room, and Destiny, she was a prostitute in her other life, AKA her nickname was Trucker. Trucker because that was her workplace preference. Anyway, she pulled me aside and she said to me, "You know, in here, everybody is clean, everybody is sober, and you can work with us. And I know you are kind and you love everybody and you trust everybody, but you know what? You got to be careful. If you," and her lesson to me was, "if you ever see any of us on the street, including me, do not approach. Do not speak to us. Do not have a word. Do not acknowledge us. Just keep on moving." And I looked at her strangely because that certainly wouldn't be who I am. And I said, "Why?" And she said, and I'll never forget it, "Because in here, everyone is clean and sober. And I'm clean and sober. I don't trust myself, though. I have no idea what's going to happen to me when I get out there. And you could come across somebody who's really strung out and they could be dangerous. Do not approach." I never forgot her. She's also someone who I've kept in touch with. There's very, very few that I've kept in touch with. She's one of three because I'm not supposed to keep in touch with anybody. She was a very special girl. Destiny was a poet, and on my Facebook page from time to time, I post her poetry. She was a poet, a prostitute, and yeah, a friend. I'm going to speak about the men's prison now. I spent a great deal of time, this chapter is called And Then There Were Men. I spent a great deal of time at a prison in Brampton that is called the Ontario Correctional Institute. It is one of the very few in Canada of its kind because this prison is treatment centric. And in order to get into the Ontario Correctional Institute, the men have to apply to get in. They have to give up, in most cases, they have to give up any chance of parole. They have to give up any chance of getting time off for good behavior because they can accumulate time for time served with good behavior, and they have to give up any chance of having that time and getting off early. But in exchange for that, they get an education, they get counseling, they get work experience, they get fitness program, and they also get decent food. What they didn't know they were going to get was a lot of Phyllis. But it is sad, and it is a sad comment on our prison system and on rehabilitation in the prison system, that this is one of the very few prisons in all of Canada that is rehab centric. Because in my opinion, in my very humble opinion, this is the way they all should be. And I have seen, and I have worked with men in here and made a difference because these guys, they want to turn their lives around. I recently found an article in Maclean's magazine, and this is what it was talking about. A recent Maclean's article. I've got to keep switching my screen around so it's not in the way of what I'm reading. A recent Maclean's article underscored serious problems in our prison system. Under the pretense of rehabilitation and treatment, the prison system operates in an inhumane and violent manner, offering little opportunity for redemption or positive change. They found that it has poor education, poor education, and failure to deal with mental health. I have seen it all. And this article is not exaggerating, and it is extraordinarily sad because there's so much more that we could be doing, not just to help the prisoners, not just to feed them with nutrition, not just to educate them, not just to deal with their mental health, but to put out a product that is not dangerous to society. I'm not suggesting that every prisoner and the Paul Bernardos of the world should be treated to great meals and such, but I am saying there's a whole lot of people in prison who are really not treated humanely and who are not given a second chance. And even if they are, they're set up to fail because they're not properly rehabilitated. And of course, that speaks to money. Now, this is my guy in the men's prison. I called him Manny Ferrero in the book. His name is Manny Cordero, and I am very, very proud of this man. Manny was my assistant at the Ontario Correctional Institute, the prison I just spoke with you about. Manny had, before coming to the Ontario Correctional Institute, had spent 10 years in the Kingston Penitentiary twice. 10 years, twice in Kingston Federal Penitentiary. He was in solitary confinement sandwiched between Paul Bernardo and David Milgaard, telling me that he kind of preferred the company of David Milgaard, and I thought that made him a somewhat better judge of personality. Manny decided that when he got the position of being my assistant, he was going to sit down and become my friend, and that he did. So on my very first day at the Ontario Correctional Institute, Manny was guiding me into the auditorium and helping to set up my equipment and give out my paperwork. With every session I delivered, I also wrote, thank God for journalism, I wrote a paper and a little manual. So if it was on forgiveness or gratitude or building a healthy relationship or whatever I was teaching, that I was also writing, and Manny was giving out my paperwork. And this goes for every prison. Destiny was giving it out in the women's prison. And at the end of the session, and all the men had filed out, Manny sat himself down right in front of me, and he said, "I hear you're a Toastmaster." Now, I don't know if anyone in this audience knows what a Toastmaster is, but Toastmaster is where people go to learn how to do public speaking and competitive speaking. And so, yes, I had been a Toastmaster for many years at the downtown location in the Royal Bank Plaza, and I was doing competitive speaking. Well, you know what? They have Toastmasters in the prison too. And Manny wanted to pick my brain and find out all about my experience, and that was our connection. And from that, a friendship was born. It's shocking, isn't it? I became really good friends with a former federal prisoner. I don't want to give away the farm. I don't want to give away the whole story. But let me just tell you that I am still in touch with Manny, and Manny has become just one of my proudest works of art. I mean, if I was an artist, it would be Manny, because this man has not only turned his life around, but you're going to have to read about the rest of it. One day I went to the prison because they were having whoops, I did not want to be doing that. One day I went to the prison because they were having a volunteer award dinner. And I was met at the door by 4 men who had created this plaque in honor of my attendance. And it was entitled Motivational Mondays, because that was the name of my lesson. And they told me that all of these things that you see in the background, the black and white, are transformers. Now, these men had created this poster for me, and it was being awarded to me that evening because they felt that I was transforming their lives one day at a time. So you see this little woman in the middle? That's me. And here she is, all enlarged so you could see her. And now, if you don't think that looks like me, we'll put some glasses on, because look at my hair. It's Brillo. And there's my face. And I'm always wearing leggings. I'm wearing them as we speak. And I guess I would wear a jacket often. And I even had this same color blouse that I would wear from time to time. I'm telling you, these people are artistic and talented, and they recreated Phyllis. I still have her. She sits on my desk, and it is one of my most precious possessions to this day. Okay, let's see if I can read. I was in this, oh, I know. This is a Google review that I found randomly. We're coming up to 8:30, so I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to do time check, okay? So I'm seeing Adele is nodding and Gail is nodding, and that's what we'll do to see how many more stories we should fit in. But I want to get this in because this is just unbelievable. I was randomly doing a Google review, and I don't know what exactly I had Googled. You know how they say diamonds are a girl's best friend? Not so much. Google is my best friend. So I found this on one of the prison sites, and here's what it said. I was in this treatment prison a few years ago. I just found this a couple of months ago. At first, I didn't like it. Too much work. But I had a really good counselor. Her name was Phyllis. Phyllis worked with me one-on-one after her classes. Stayed late. Never had anything like it because she was really helpful in making me realize my thinking was my problem. I don't know if she will ever see this review, but while I was there, she helped me learn so much. This place, he was speaking about the Ontario Correctional Institute. This place is really great if you really want to change. Now, here's the thing. You see the name it was signed by at the bottom right, Calvin B? My father's name was Calvin Blitzstein. This guy was Calvin B. And I mean, it just sent shivers up my spine when I found this review. You can imagine. So, ladies, we're up to just over an hour. I know that we want to leave it open for Q&A as well. Do you want me to keep on going story time, or do you want to open it up to questions that might be more personal?
I think we should get to the questions.
All righty. Okay. I'm gonna skip to the end then very
Sure.
quickly. So this will take about 2 minutes. The best thing I ever did for myself was reach out and touch others. Now I'm going to go through. Okay, we're not going to get through. This is all in the book. I'm just getting to where I need to be. Okay. This is a listing of what I teach in the prison system very quickly. Enhancing romance, the psychology of friendship, breaking bad. I do this actually in the public speaking arena as well. Breaking Bad is anger management, intentional happiness, find your passion. It goes on and on. This is what I teach. This stuff's not listed in the book. If anybody wants any information, you're free to give out my email address at any time. And I believe that there are 2 degrees of separation. Those degrees being the mother and father who gave us life and who valued that life. On Christmas Day, I attend prison and serve lunch. I am thankful to live my life on this side of the bars and to provide comfort and support to those who don't. Always remember, folks, adversity is what you make of it, not what it makes of you. Thank you. And now we can go to, thank you, Adele. And now we can open the floor if people want to unmute or however you're orchestrating that this evening, and I'm happy to answer. Let me just turn this off or it's going to drive everybody like kind of nuts.
Yeah, I was just going to say you can stop sharing your screen.
I'm going to do that. I think I did I? I think, oh, here we are. Stop share. Here we go. Okay.
There we go.
We're good. Okay, here I am. A little bit bumpy, but I think we got through all those slides. It was just a little bit bumpy with figuring out the Zoom. Haven't done that in a while. So questions?
Yes, thank you, Phyllis. That was interesting. And what resonated with me is you said that everything in your life was be shared. And also, I was wondering, do you believe that people come in and out of your life for a reason as well?
You know what? I have to believe that. I feel that is so true. People come in and out of our lives and they say for a reason, a season, or for forever. And I mean, I think most of us can attest to that, because I bet you that everybody in our audience this evening can say they've had a person come into their life just long enough to change their life. And like Trish came into my life just long enough for me to realize I had a really bad marriage and I needed to get out of it. And that was her purpose. But I know I've had people who have come into my life and stayed forever, and they're welcome to stay. And yes, I really do believe in that.
Did you ever forgive your father?
That is a really interesting question. I was delivering this presentation to a group in Montreal, and it was 800 men. So very, very interesting that one of the men asked me, and I'm glad that you've asked me again this evening, did you ever forgive your father, and when did you forgive your father? This is probably going to be surprising to a lot of people. I never had to forgive my father. I have never looked at it as I never hated him. I always loved him. I always appreciated that he pushed me into the extroverted, arena, that because of him I learned a lot about Judaism. I was sent for religious classes. I was sent for Hebrew classes. There was so many pluses. I learned a very high integrity, which is shocking to people when they find out that my father, who abused me and, by the way, locked me up for a year, Locked me up for a year. Yeah, when they found out I was go-go dancing, that's an amazing chapter. I got caught go-go dancing, and they got a hold of my diary, and I got really got severely beaten and punished and locked up for a year. You got to read all about it. And because I was taught integrity. I was taught Judaism. I was taught extrovertedness. It led me to where I am today. So I never really felt anything but love for my father and appreciation. And I never really focused on all the badness and difficulty and tough childhood that I had, because everything just seemed to, I had friends to make up for what I didn't have at home. So things did always work out.
Just want to remind everyone, if they have any questions, please put them in the chat and I can ask on your behalf. We do have one here that was sent to me, and we were wondering, what was it like during the pandemic for you? One, as an extrovert, how did you manage with lockdown? And two, were you still allowed to go into the prison system?
Excellent questions. So, firstly, the easy one is when COVID hit, the prison sent all volunteers home. Now there weren't a lot of volunteers in all the prisons, but in the Ontario Correctional Institute, there were volunteers, because there was somebody that was a treatment centric prison. And there were people coming in to teach yoga and meditation and different gymnastics. And of course, I'm doing my thing. When COVID hit, that prison, and there's an article in the newspaper, that prison in Brampton, the Ontario Correctional Institute, was actually shut down. All volunteers were sent home, but there was an outbreak of 60 prisoners and 20 staff, all documented in the Toronto Star, and we were not allowed in. And that was very painful for me, because I knew that they were living for my weekly visits so that they could have another lesson, or they could talk to me, because what I would do is I would teach the prisoners I would have a 2-hour session, and then we would have another hour or hour and a half. They would give up their gym class after my session to sit down and just chat with me, and we would do some life coaching stuff. I would do one-on-ones, I would do group classes. So that was painful. But the COVID itself was not that painful for me, and I'll tell you why. It was an excellent question that somebody asked, because I didn't know what to do with myself when COVID hit, because yeah, as an extrovert, I want to go out and touch somebody. But it was then that I sat down and began writing my book. So it took me 2 years to write my book, and I did all of that during COVID. So I drove my fiance crazy, because if he would crack an egg, I would look at him like he had a nerve making noise. But nevertheless, I did bring purpose to my life during that 2 years.
Good. And just to clarify, you've been a volunteer all this time, or do you get paid?
Just a decade.
You've been okay. What turned into like 2 years, I have enough salary to volunteer, has turned into a decade of volunteering in the prisons?
That's right. That's very astute of you. When I was fired, I hate that word, when I was terminated, they paid me out for 2 years. And so I had like, this is great. I've got salary, and and not only they paid me out for 2 years, but part of the term of my termination agreement was I could not work in another law firm. So what am I going to do when I grow up? I couldn't be with a competitor. I couldn't work in another law firm. And so this prison experience came along, which was all shared, all fantastic, all the timing. And, but I was never paid, and not only never paid, but I was traveling an hour to an hour and a half each way, especially in a snowstorm, out to Brampton, to Milton, and not reimbursed for gas either. So it was a difficulty. And then when that 2 years was used up, I was 8 years of struggle. And that's not a joke. That's serious authenticity. That's what it was. I just decided that this is what I want to do, and I'm not giving it up. And what's really interesting, actually, just as an add-on, is that after I was terminated from the law firm, I was called and asked if I would consider coming back, because the training department actually fell apart, and they fired the gal who had gotten me fired, and thought, well, maybe we can get her back. And now this is 10 years later, and my book has come out, and the person who fired me has read it. She's mentioned in there. She's after me now to come and do some motivational speaking for the law firm. So it's just a full circle validation of extraordinary proportions that makes me very, very happy. And just, as I say, very validated.
Just have two final questions. And one question is, can you give us a piece of, or an example of, what positive advice were you giving to the women in the prison? Like, how did you encourage them to change their thinking to be positive?
It's really hard to answer that as a question,
Okay.
but I will try. Well, let me try. What would I tell them? Okay, if we were talking about forgiveness, because each lesson was, I would give them a different piece of advice. But let's just take forgiveness for an example. You cannot, it doesn't matter whether it's them or whether it's you, Gail, you cannot go through life with a black heart. I used to talk about the Walmart woman. You know, the Walmart woman, she's the one in the lineup who wants to jump on top of the cashier and give her hell just because she said good morning, and she'll fight with her. We've all seen the Walmart woman. We've all experienced people who are angry without cause. And I'm going to tell you that from my research and from my writing and from everything I know, these are people who are angry because they have not forgiven, others for what they've done to them, or themselves for what they've done to others. And so, as an example, in teaching forgiveness, we would really focus on and try to have people understand that they needed to forgive others and themselves. And let me just tell you something. The hardest thing I ever got someone to do, and I'm going to use the term right here, right now, was a serial rapist. I worked with a serial rapist, and someone read my book and said to me, "Congratulations, I have never read a book in the last 20 years, but I made my way through your book." And not only that, but she had been fighting me all along because she didn't believe in second chances. And she said, "And when you spoke about the serial rapist, I cried. I cried." And then there's another rapist who didn't deserve a second chance. That's covered in there too.
Adele, you have a question?
Yes, first of all, I want to thank Phyllis for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And can you tell everyone where your book is available if they want to buy it?
Yeah, that was my last question.
Okay.
Well, that's a great question. The last time I was asked that question, I was like, yeah, where is that book available? So now I know. So it is available globally on Amazon. So you can find it through Amazon Canada, but it is available throughout wherever Amazon is accessible throughout the world. It's in every Indigo store and Chapters, if they still exist. I'm not sure if they're all one anymore, but it's a very popular at Hillcrest Mall. Apparently they keep selling out and ordering more in, and in all popular bookstores. And I hear that it's even being ordered into libraries these days, but there's a long waiting list. So
oh yeah, one of our members wrote it's in the library. So
yes,
great. So
I think Toronto Library is one of the libraries where it's been located.
So I just want to thank Phyllis and Adele and Beth Tikvah Women for inviting Adult Education to join you on this very interesting topic and book. And thank you very much to both of you and everyone else for watching. We will have a recording of this program in case you missed parts of it and joined late.
And I want to thank you very much for welcoming me into your homes this evening, for sitting with me for about an hour and a quarter, for asking the questions, and for being such a great audience. Even though I can't hear you, I can feel you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good
night,
night.
ladies.
Thank
Good night.
you.